I've been thinking about making this video for a while now, but I haven't made it because a lot of the points that I'm mentioning, or I'm going to mention in this video, are obvious to me now. However, if I look back at myself a few years ago, I would say that a lot of these points weren't very obvious to me, and by noticing them over the past few years, I've become a lot better of an athlete, and I realize I want to share these points with you guys because I feel like even though a lot of them are small details, they will help you become a better athlete and just player in general. My channel is mainly soccer, football content. I would say that all this stuff does apply to any athlete from any sport at any level. And the first one is training mindfully instead of mindlessly. And for those of you guys that don't know what it means to be mindful, it means being more attentive, aware, or careful with what you're doing. I don't think careful really applies, but just be, as an athlete, when you're training, it's important to be aware of what you're doing and not just going into a training session. Let's say for soccer, you just go to the field and you have a set routine, like I'm gonna do 50 passes, take 20 shots or whatever, and you're just thinking about completing it. That's not what you should be doing. Instead, I would focus on breaking down the technique and then implementing that into your training. Watching professionals, how they pass the ball, how they shoot the ball, let's say a boxer, how they punch, how they protect themselves, stuff like that. Break it down from a professional's point of view. Then while you're training, try to replicate what the professional did. Obviously everyone has different styles, but I would say focus on common things. Let's say like passing in soccer, everyone locks their ankle when they pass the ball. Stuff like that. Make sure when you're actually passing and you go out to train, you're not just passing without thinking. Eventually you're gonna want it to become mindless, but at first when you're first learning a new technique, you want to be fully aware of what you're doing and why you're doing everything. Why you're taking that step, why you're putting your foot there. So many little details that you should be worried about. A lot of people just go into their training session and think about the bigger picture, but you should be thinking about every little detail, like where your foot's placed, where your other foot is like contacting with the ball. There's so many different things. There's so many things that you can break down. I could go on forever. Another point that does help this is emphasizing rest in your training sessions. And obviously everyone thinks that you gotta be pushing yourself all the time, which is good at some points, but I would say if you're trying to work on a new technique, which a lot of people do need to master the technique and really focus in on what they're trying to accomplish with like learning how to pass the ball in a certain way. Another thing you should be doing if you're trying to learn a technique and replicate, let's say, a professional's style of doing something, and you can translate this to the gym also. Only a few years back I really started to do this, which is creating a mind-to-muscle connection. And what this means is essentially, let's say you're doing a pull-up, really focusing in on your back when you're doing the pull-up, or if you're doing a chin-up, focusing on the biceps, stuff like that, doing the specific exercise, whatever exercise you're doing, this goes back to passing, punching, hitting a baseball, something like that, whatever. It doesn't matter what you're doing, just think about the actual goal that you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to get a bigger back? You gotta focus in on your back then. If you're trying to hit a top corner, how are you gonna place your foot with your left foot, your right foot, to get the curl on the ball or the knuckle, whatever you're trying to go for. There's so many details, but really thinking about what you're doing. So if you're really trying to master a technique, I would recommend training mindfully at first, and then eventually, once you do it repetitively, it will become mindless, and then in your competition, whatever it is. Another thing I do recommend, if you can, is try to record every training session you do, every gym session you do. And I like doing this in slow motion just because I can really break down what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, and also just what I like and don't like about my technique. The second main point I want to make is focusing on the footwear. The shoes you wear are so important, and I don't think people realize this, or at least I didn't realize it until a few years ago, because for the longest time I would double sock, I would wear 2 insoles, I would tie my shoelaces around my cleats, just because I didn't realize all this space in the front of my shoe was making me play worse. The less friction there is between your foot and the sole of the shoe, so you're also less prone to injury, I would recommend that you try to find a tight shoe. There's a reason why professionals get custom fit boots. They're trying to get any advantage they can on the field, and this is one of them that I don't think people realize how important it is, because for the longest time I didn't want to have my feet too tight in my shoe, which can be bad. I wouldn't recommend getting too tight or too loose. Saying this now, it sounds like common knowledge, but to myself, it wasn't common knowledge like a few years ago. Some people say it doesn't matter which brand you get, but some companies focus more on narrow shoes and some focus on wider. I don't want to give specifics because I don't know the exact details which company offers which, but just look it up on Google. Actually, matter of fact, go into an actual store and test on the shoes before you buy it if you're going to buy it online. The last one and the most important one, in my opinion, is being on your toes. Being on your toes doesn't mean being like this. It's more about having a shorter ground contact time. But look at any professional athlete, and especially the elite athletes, just next time you watch them play, just focus on how much they're on their toes. Like 80 to 85% of the time, these professional athletes are on their toes the whole time. It's just so important because you gotta be ready to change direction at any time. And the ones that are the most explosive have the shortest ground contact time, meaning they generate the most force with the least amount of ground contact. This doesn't necessarily apply to every sport. I was watching this boxing video, and this guy mentioned that you should, I don't box, but this guy mentioned that you should have, if you're trying to get the most power in your punches, you want to place the weight on your heels, just because being on your toes, you're not able to generate as much force. And for swimming, let's say, you want to have your foot as loose as possible, I'm pretty sure. In golf, you're standing still, so you don't have a need to be on your toes. Any sport where you need to change direction quickly, this is really important because I noticed this is the biggest detail, especially in myself. Looking back 3 years ago, every training session I was doing, my weight was I was flat-footed, my weight was never on my toes. You can see a difference in the training sessions. One of them looks lazy, and then more recently when I'm on my toes, it just looks more sharp. And I would say this is the biggest detail I've noticed over the past few years between amateurs and pro level. Amateurs will be on their toes maybe a tiny bit. Next time you watch any sport, I want you to pay close attention to the athlete's feet and how often their heels are not touching the ground, because I've noticed, I've been watching it recently, and the majority of the time their heels are never touching the ground, and that's something that you want to work on when you're training. It's not easy to change just immediately, so just work on it over time, try to be conscious of it, but just build that connection towards the bottom of your feet to try to keep your heels elevated. Be on your toes as much as possible. Obviously there are exceptions in certain occasions when you're trying to slow down. Maybe you shouldn't be on your toes. I'm not a scientist, but these are just things I've noticed over the past 3 years, and I thought I'd share them with you guys because I think that these things have changed me as an athlete and made me a lot more efficient. And I don't know if you guys have noticed over the past few years, but I've gotten a lot better, and you can probably tell from my videos. Just the training sessions have looked more efficient. I hope these points aren't just obvious and I'm just making this video for no reason.